Welcome students, I'm Karen. I'm your lecturer for Motivations of Sport and Fitness. Today is the lecture will focus on basically an explanation of really the units about what sport psychology is. Motivation is part of the sport psychology concepts, however, it's not the whole thing. So I'm just going to do a quick introduction, show you your assessment tasks, and then refer you on to have a look at the recordings of assessment tasks that I have on your page. So this is a Google Hangout. This is the tool we're going to use when we meet up online. It's pretty cool. You get to share your documents. So I'm going to now switch the screen over to the lecture and then begin going through the lecture stuff, and then I'll wrap it up at the end. So I'm looking forward to talking to you guys. I've given you all a call yesterday. I got through to some of you and some of you haven't. However, I will get you to rate your preferences. I've actually got a tool Phil and I designed that allows you to click your preferences of when you have some good times to meet for a Google Hangout. We're going to have to go with the majority, so apologies for that. If you can't make the Google Hangout time, I will record it anyway, so you're not going to miss out the content for that week. So let's begin, first of all, with, oh, you can't see me. Oh, you can see me. Sorry. Let's begin, first of all, with the lecture. So I'm going to just share the screen now. And at the moment, you should see just the lecture. So the unit's titled Methods of Motivation in Fitness and Sport. The things that I want you to achieve by the end of it, so the unit outcomes. At the completion of the unit, I want you to be able to demonstrate an understanding of the psychological, social and emotional impacts of sport and exercise in the sporting environment. I think what's really, really interesting, particularly for those who have been heavily involved in sport or exercise, the things that contribute to your experience in sport, and these things can be psychological, social and emotional. I also want you to be able to identify and differentiate between motivations and psychological characteristics of the elite athletes, the recreational athletes, and those of different age groups. In fact, our second assessment task quite heavily focuses on this. I want you to be able to apply performance enhancement strategies to yourself in your own sporting experience or in leadership positions within sport and exercise. However, the goal is not to create sports psychologists. That requires 6 years of training. But I think having an awareness of psychological factors, how to work with people, how to establish rapport, all that kind of stuff can really enhance your experience in sport for the betterment of the team, athletes, and obviously outcomes. And then lastly, I want you to acknowledge and explain the importance of coach-athlete or fitness trainer relationships. Such a powerful thing, and at the end of the day, we can't get along with everybody. We're going to have some great relationships and relationships that weren't so effective. And for us, it would be about reflecting on what worked, what didn't work, and if I were to work in the future with the same kind of cohort or the same people, how do I make adjustments so the process is effective? So what is sport and exercise psychology? First and foremost, it is a science that applies the principles of psychology. Sorry, let me start again. It is a science in which the principles of psychology are applied in the sport and exercise setting. Sport and exercise psychs use their knowledge to develop principles and guidelines for professionals to help assist them in increasing participation and experience of adults and children in sport and exercise. At present, I'm working very closely with the Institute of Sport, and in doing that, we're prepping the athletes to get ready for Rio. So we had a fairly long journey for some of them. For some of them, it's a 4-year process, and they're at the very end of the 4 years. The strategies we used at the beginning are very different to the strategies we're using now approaching the games. So we'll have a look at what's really cool, and I love this subject, is share my experiences, obviously not names of athletes, but share experiences of problems that they have experienced, and then the ways that we approach trying to overcome that through the use of psychological strategies. So the two things that sport and exercise psychology examines, first and foremost, it does examine the psychological and emotional factors on sport and exercise performance. For example, it does look at how does somebody who's lacking confidence influence their ability to learn a new skill. The other thing that it does examine is the effects of sport and exercise involvement and that effect on psychological and emotional factors. For example, running does, questioning whether running does reduce anxiety and depression. So these are really, you think about, I guess the hard thing is to get to the gym, but after a good gym session, you do feel great, and it does have positive benefits to psychological and emotional well-being. It is a scientific method, like I said, so you probably have a multiple choice question about this. We do apply it is a systematic approach to studying a question. We look at theories behind whatever the concepts are of a phenomenon. So what a theory is a set of interrelated facts presenting a systematic view of some phenomenon in order to describe, explain, and predict its future occurrences. I think what's important about this is that when we go through this course, I'm going to go through a lot of theories and give you different perspectives on how people have described, explained, and predicted future occurrences through these theories that they have come up with. And this is really important for your essay, because your essay, and I'll explain it a little bit later, requires you to suggest strategies to then apply with the strategies, explain why you implement those strategies by using the explanation of a theory. The difference between a study and an experiment. A study involves investigators to observe or access factors without changing the environment in any way. So there is no cause and effect relationship established between the factors. An experiment, however, involves investigators manipulating and observing variables. So they examine how changes in one variable can affect other variables. There is an experimental and control group. So for example, one of my thesis, which has been released, I actually worked in the basketball environment. I think it was under 12 representative kids, and I had, they actually acted as their own control and experiment. So we basically measured performance in a free throw with what they usually do. Then I added a breathing technique, a centering breath, into their pre-performance routines. And what I found was, whilst the control group is when they didn't have any intervention, so there was no breathing technique, then I trained them to do the breathing technique, and then we tested again their free throw shooting performance after the breathing technique, and what it found for all individuals was that their shooting percentage increased. So that's what an experiment is, whereas a study is just observing and accessing factors without changing the environment in any way. The art of sport and exercise psychology. So it's actually a social science. It's very different from other sciences because as human beings we can think and manipulate our environment, which makes it really hard for predicting behaviour, sometimes impossible. So psychologists practice by using general principles. So whilst we have general principles, it doesn't necessarily apply to all situations. The art of sport and exercise psychology is the ability to identify when and in what situations to individualise these principles. So regardless of the fact that I have a whole heap of knowledge of this, the art for me is to go, well, this is the individual, this is what they're presenting, and this strategy is going to be more likely successful for them. What works for me is going to be very different for somebody else. So it's about applying all the knowledge I have and then making it specific to the individual that I'm working with. What are the roles of a sports psych? there are 3 different types of roles. We have the science role, which is your research roles, your PhDs, your studies, your theses. So they spend a lot of time researching whether these strategies are effective or not. So they do experiments, or they have a look at, or they comprise of studies and collect information that then feeds into practice, second area. So practice insights are either counselling or educators. At the present, I'm doing those 2 roles. So I educate and I talk you guys through sports psych. And then I counsel as well. So I see athletes at the Institute of Sports and in a private business where I have a look at, work with them one-on-one or with teams, identify needs and implement strategies where appropriate. How to become a sports psych? It does take at least 6 years of psychological training. Legally, only those registered with the National Psychologist Registration Board may use the term psychologist. And then to label, so I can call myself a sports psychologist because I mastered for 2 years in sports psychology. We have clinical psychs, we have organisational psychs, so it depends on, for your masters, what your area was that you wanted to go down. Like I mentioned before, one of the most important things about the education and the science, or sorry, the practice and the science features of sports psychology or areas of sports psychology is the fact that findings from research should feed into your psychological practice and education. So, for example, I can't just work with a client and say, sweet, goal setting works for me, it's got to work for you. I instead would go, well, goal setting in the research has demonstrated to be effective on many occasions. Therefore, I can apply goal setting in your situation because the research supports that this strategy is effective. All the different areas, we're probably touching on most of these. We'll have a look at motivation, arousal regulation, emotions. We'll have a look at thoughts, cognitions. Strategies such as imagery, we'll have a look at exercise adherence, confidence, peak performance, what's it like to be in the zone, reinforcement, feedback, group dynamics, group cohesion. We'll have a look at leadership styles, communication, concentration, personality, have a look at injuries and burnout in sport, and the different approaches for competition and training and what it means for athletes. Again, back on this idea of the fact that the science, just spoke about the art which is my ability to go, well, here's all the knowledge I have, the scientific knowledge, and apply it and individualise it for that individual. The science is really looking at the strengths and limitations of the knowledge. So here we're looking at the source of the knowledge, if it's scientifically derived or is it professionally practiced, that I came to those conclusions. With that, so if it has been, the research has supported what I'm doing in my in practice. The strengths of that, it's highly reliable, it's systematic and controlled, and it's objective and unbiased. However, just using scientific knowledge, it only focuses on a few variables. It's conservative and often slow to evolve, and lack of focus on external validity. So how I can actually use that information in practice. Whereas professional practice, whilst it's holistic, innovative and immediate, it is less reliable because what works for one individual doesn't necessarily work for all. There is a lack of explanation of why it's working, and it's greater susceptibility to bias. So the way my outlook on it might be biased because it was me who implemented that strategy. Okay, what is sports psych? You know what? It's to get your mind to work for you rather than against you. It's about going into games, controlling what you can control, letting go of what you can't control and knowing the difference. I think that's a big challenge for many athletes. They tend to get caught up on all the things they can't control and waste energy on that. So, for example, a referee's bad call. I have many mates who just get consumed by this bad call and it really deters them from the game. what I spent a lot of time with athletes on is, well, okay, well, what can you control? You can't control when your coach puts you on and off the court and how long you get. What you can control is your performance in the moments that you get, so that you stay out there as long as you can. Things that we can control. So we can control our feelings, our thoughts, our decisions, and our plans. I think the key principle here, particularly for those athletes going to Rio, is we need to get on top of this. We need to be prepped for it, and we need it ready to be rolled out. So particularly plans and decisions and practice simulation and all that stuff, so they're ready to go. Things you can't, the score, opponents, past mistakes, other people, the weather. I think the weather comes in quite often. And it's interesting, even though the weather has been identified for some teams as, oh, we play really bad in the rain, and it's like, well, you better practice in the rain, because at the end of the day, you can't change the weather. So you can't control that, but what you can control is your ability to play in that condition. Who can utilise a sports psychologist? Anyone who's performed, basically. I'm aware that not only athletes and performers use it, coaches, teams, and students have used it. But I've actually, my head coordinator when I was at university, her niche market was doctors. She actually worked with doctors and trained them and provided strategies so that when they sat their big exams, that they were prepped for it. So in that field, they actually, I think, only had 2 or 3 attempts at the exam, and if they had failed on the second or third, I can't remember what that was, they could no longer become a doctor. So they sort of had limited chances of being successful. The second important factor about that is they had 2 different types of exams. So they had a practical exam where they had to be able to do a surgery and not shake in front of three examiners. But they also had an oral exam where they sat in front of 3 people and were throwing questions and had to quickly be able to analyse and communicate how they would tackle that situation that was presented. Sports psychologists have worked with the military about performance enhancement, how to get through fatigue, psych-up strategies, those kind of things, and obviously the counselling side of it, debriefing, what's working, what's not working. But basically anybody who wants to perform can utilise a sports psych. So why is it important? Why is it important? And I guess that's a question that I throw out in my lectures for people to answer. At the end of the day, particularly at the elite level, usually the only thing that separates somebody getting the gold as opposed to being unsuccessful is the head, because physically they should be matched because they've made it to that level. So at the elite level, it generally is an X factor that influences your outcome. 3 different approaches. There's many approaches, but I'm just going to talk about these 3. So we have the social psychological orientation. So this looks at the complex interactions between the social environment and the personal makeup of the person. So, for example, one of the questions that you might want to examine is, how does a leadership style affect group cohesion? So you're not just looking at the social environment, you're looking at the personality characteristics that make up that person and how that impacts on the social environment. The psychophysiological orientation, this studies psychological processes of the brain and their influence on physical activity. So, for example, determining relationships between heart rate or brainwave activity and performance. Many studies have shown shooters have actually trained to be that in tune with their heart rate that they were trained to fire between heartbeats to increase accuracy, because in the break, so in the relaxation part of the contract, the contracting and part of the brain, the heart, that is when the body's at the most relaxed. And then the CBT, or cognitive behavioural therapy, this looks at how a person's thoughts and environment determines their behaviour. It is your thoughts, your cognitions that play a central part in determining your behaviour. And it really, so for example, you might want to have a look at how negative thoughts impair your performance. It's interesting when I work with athletes and I listen to the language of their self-talk. So when as soon as they use things like don't miss this, you're actually ironically telling your body to do what you don't want it to do. So when I say don't think of the pink elephant, you ironically are thinking of a pink elephant. So you've got to be careful with what you are saying to yourself for performance. The most productive thoughts that you can have are process-orientated thoughts. I need to do this, this, and this to be successful. So instead of the shooter saying don't miss, the shooter should be saying bend, elbow, flick, so that they have the right execution of the process. So this is what CBT looks like, cognitive behavioural therapy. You thought, I'm going to miss this shot, leads to you to start to feel scared and really nervous, and that then influences your behaviour. You're more likely to miss, or you have an outburst of anger because you've missed because of this process. Think about your sports, and I think it's interesting for different sports requires different mental capacities depending on, I guess, not only, so for example, golf, people would say initially when you learn how to play golf, it's quite a physical, you focus so much on the physical component so that you can get the proper execution of the skill. But when you get towards the elite level, it's all mental. You've got the skills down, you know how to execute it, and generally what defines the difference between a successful golfer and an unsuccessful golfer is a mental capacity of being able to get through all the holes, walk all those distances, and to have to think about their last shot. Was it successful? Was it not? What does this mean? That kind of stuff. So think about your sports and what percentage would you give for the physical components of it and the mental. So the variables that you'll have to think about is what level are you at? Because if you're only early in the sport, then it's quite heavily focused on the physical components. But as you get more to the elite level, it really generally would be your mental components that will influence whether you're successful or not. I pretty much just answered that stuff. Why do people give different levels of importance? What factors influence the scores? So that depends on the sport itself, your level, and even age at the time, and where you are in the journey of your sport. Athletes do acknowledge, athletes and coaches have acknowledged that at least 40 to 90% of success in sport is due to mental factors. And as skill level increases, the mental aspects of performance become more important. So usually I'll just pose this out to the audience when I'm doing a live lecture. What are some examples of performance issues? But I'll just say a few: lack of confidence, inability to concentrate, can't get focus back after being distracted, burnout, or psychological factors that are related to burnout or injury, which could be depression, isolation, identity loss, how to bounce back after making an error, resilience, those kind of things. So hopefully throughout this course you'll get some ideas. And the one thing that I really took away as a student in this particular type of unit was the information that could actually help my life and how I could implement strategies to help enhance my performance in areas. Why do we need a sports psych at the elite level? Like I said before, generally when you get towards that level, they are physically matched, almost, unless you're a bolt and you're just a freak, and just naturally blessed. Elite athletes are getting closer and closer to each other with regards to that physical ability and talent. Therefore, one's thoughts and feelings must be the X factor that influences whether they're successful or not, whether they've got their strategy ready, whether they're process orientated or outcome orientated. Like, these are all going to come into play. And generally that's the head, the brain, what you're thinking tends to be the X factor. Why do we need it at the novice level, so the beginners? Sports psych does allow for the novice athletes to develop the psychological skills needed to help Then persist, value, succeed, evaluate, progress, lead. I mean, I think about my sport experience. I'm so thankful for the 26 years of basketball that I played. I think, I learned so many skills, how to be a leader, how to work in a group, how to back myself when I need to back myself. So it's really, really quite a unique thing for people to experience, but it's definitely an experience that you can gain lots of skills out of. Now, with regards to this course, I'm not teaching you to be a sports psych. This is not what the course is about. What I want you to have is an awareness of all that stuff that's happening in your environment when you're coaching or you're leading or you're training, and understanding the psychological factors that influence your performance, but also understanding how exercise and sport can influence your well-being and health. Now, in this course, I've actually recorded your assessment tasks, like an explanation. So if you go into the assessment section, which actually I'll show you at the end of this, I have recorded an explanation of how to do these tasks. You'll have 3 multiple choice quizzes that have 20 questions in it. This is in total worth 20%, so each quiz is about 6.9 or 7.1%, or 6.8, I don't know. And it will open in week 4 and close week 5. It'll open week 8, close week 9, and open week 12, close week 10. Oh, sorry, study break. In those weeks, the quiz will be open for the whole week. And your content will be based on the 4 weeks prior to. So for quiz 1, your focus is on weeks 1, 2, 3, 4. Quiz 2, your focus is on 5, 6, 7, 8. And the last quiz is focused on week 9, 10, 11, and 12. You also have a group presentation and handout. This is worth 40%. You'll get an individual and a group mark. Your individual mark, which will be 20%, will be based on the 5 minutes that you present about your target population. And then you'll have 20% mark for how your group works together. You will actually use Google Hangout to do your presentation, and I will get you some instructions on how to do a Google Doc so you can share your document and do your handout together. We'll start that. I actually will just talk when I see you in week 3 about how we get that done. You actually record it yourselves and then send it in to me. So as long as I get it by the end of the semester, I'm happy. And then the last one is an essay. I really like this question. Basically, this question will tell me how much you've learnt about the course. Do you understand the theories? Do you understand what strategies are appropriate when? So have a look at the explanations of these assessment tasks, because that'll really help you understand these tasks. But don't forget, I will still be available each week to talk you through that. And I'll have some scaffolding tasks that will allow you to get that achieved. Okay, so I'm just going to end this show and stop sharing. So hopefully I'm back on. So that's the lecture for the first week. Hopefully you've got a better understanding of what sports psych actually is. I have recorded those assessments. I really want you to be familiar with that now. So once you finish this, go and have a look at your assessment tasks. We won't see each other till week 3. So just write down any questions or concerns that you have and raise them. If you can't make the allocated time that we've put, give me a call. You've got my number and you've got my email. Next week, however, and I'll speak to you, I'm going to record week 2 lecture now. So you'll have that content, but I will be on leave, so I will get back to you in week 3. But I hope you enjoy this course. It's my favourite course to teach, and I look forward to meeting you all. See you soon.